The winter wind cut through Faith Anderson's thin shawl like 1,000 needles, each gust reminding her that she had nowhere left to go and no one who wanted her anymore. She stood at the edge of Willits, California, watching the last rays of December sunlight fade behind the towering redwoods, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her belly beneath her worn dress, feeling more alone than she had ever imagined possible in this world. The year was 1883, and winter had come early to Northern California, bringing with it a cold snap that had the entire logging town buzzing with worry about frozen water pumps and livestock. Faith had arrived in Willits 3 months ago with her husband Thomas, full of hope and dreams about starting fresh in this growing timber town. But those dreams had shattered 2 weeks ago when Thomas died in a logging accident, crushed beneath a massive redwood that had fallen the wrong way. She had thought Thomas's family would help her, thought his mother would show some compassion for the widow carrying her grandchild. But instead, she had been met with cold accusations and bitter words. Thomas's mother had never approved of their marriage, had called Faith a gold digger from the start, despite the fact that Thomas had barely $2 to his name when they wed. This morning, Faith had been thrown out of the boarding house where she and Thomas had been staying, his mother declaring that she would not pay another cent for a woman who was probably carrying some other man's bastard child. The words had cut deeper than any winter wind ever could, but Faith had held her head high as she gathered her few belongings and walked out into the cold afternoon. Now, as darkness crept across the logging town, Faith realized she had made a terrible mistake in not begging, in not pleading her case more forcefully. Pride was a luxury she could not afford, not when she was 6 months pregnant and the temperature was dropping fast. She had walked to the edge of town hoping to find work at one of the other boarding houses, but everyone knew everyone in Willits, and Thomas's mother had already spread her poison. 3 different establishments had turned Faith away, barely letting her finish her request for work before shutting their doors in her face. The owner of the general store had looked at her with pity, but shaken his head, explaining that his wife would never allow him to hire a pregnant widow with scandal attached to her name. Faith pulled her shawl tighter and looked around desperately. The main street of Willits was emptying as families hurried home to warm fires and hot suppers. She could see smoke rising from chimneys, could smell bread baking and meat roasting, and her stomach cramped with hunger. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, and the baby inside her seemed to sense her distress, moving restlessly against her ribs. She had perhaps another hour before full darkness fell, and after that, she would be in real danger. The California mountains could be unforgiving in winter, and while Willits did not get the heavy snows of the Sierra Nevada, the temperatures could still drop below freezing. She began walking, not sure where she was going, just knowing she needed to keep moving. Her feet carried her past the last buildings of the town and onto a dirt road that led into the forest. She was not thinking clearly anymore, just moving on instinct, seeking shelter anywhere she might find it. The trees closed in around her, massive redwoods and Douglas firs that blocked out what little remained of the daylight. Her breath came in visible puffs, and she could no longer feel her fingers despite clutching them in the fabric of her shawl. Faith was about to turn back, realizing the foolishness of walking into the wilderness alone, when she saw it. A small cabin sat in a clearing just off the road, smoke rising from its stone chimney in a thin gray line. It looked sturdy and well-maintained, with a small barn beside it and a corral that held 2 horses. She hesitated, knowing that approaching a stranger's home in these parts could be dangerous, but the alternative was freezing to death in the forest. She made her decision and started toward the cabin, her legs trembling with exhaustion and cold. She was halfway across the clearing when the cabin door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes and a heavy coat, a hat pulled low over his face. He stopped when he saw her, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun belt at his hip before he seemed to register that she was a woman and clearly in distress. He took a few steps toward her, and Faith could see his face now in the dim light. He was perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and strong features that might have been handsome if they were not set in such a hard expression. "Help me," Faith managed to say, and then her legs gave out completely. She did not quite lose consciousness, but everything went gray and distant for a moment. When her vision cleared, she was being carried, held securely in strong arms that moved with quick efficiency toward the cabin. The man carrying her did not speak, but she could feel the tension in his body, could sense his wariness. He kicked the cabin door open wider and brought her inside, and the wave of warmth that hit her was so intense it almost hurt. He set her down in a chair near the fireplace, and Faith found herself surrounded by heat and light. The cabin was small but well organized, with a kitchen area in one corner, a bed in another, and various supplies stacked neatly along the walls. The fire in the stone fireplace burned bright and hot, and she instinctively held her hands toward it, trying to coax feeling back into her frozen fingers. The man stepped back and studied her with dark eyes that missed nothing. He took in her worn dress, her thin shawl, the swell of her pregnant belly, and the way she was shaking with cold and exhaustion. His jaw tightened, and something that might have been anger flashed across his face, though Faith did not think it was directed at her. "When did you last eat?" His voice was deep and rough, as though he did not use it often. "Yesterday morning," Faith admitted, too tired to lie. He muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse and moved to the kitchen area. Faith watched as he ladled soup from a pot that had been simmering over the fire, the smell of it making her stomach clench with desperate hunger. He brought her a bowl and a spoon, along with a thick piece of bread, and Faith had to force herself to eat slowly rather than gulping it down like an animal. The man did not sit or speak while she ate. He moved around the cabin, stoking the fire higher, pulling a thick blanket from the bed and draping it over her shoulders, checking the window shutters to make sure they were secure against the night cold. Faith finished the soup and bread, feeling warmth spreading through her body for the first time in hours, and the baby settled down inside her, no longer moving with such agitation. "Thank you," she said quietly. The man finally stopped moving and looked at her properly. His eyes were brown, she noticed, a rich dark brown that reminded her of the earth after rain. "Who put you out?" he asked bluntly. Faith felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the fire. "My husband's mother. My husband died 2 weeks ago in a logging accident." She did not believe the child was his. The man's expression did not change, but she saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. "The child is his." "Yes." Faith met his eyes steadily, willing him to believe her. "I love Thomas. I have never been with another man. But his mother never wanted him to marry me, and now she is using his death as an excuse to be rid of me." The man nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he had suspected. "You are from Willits?" "Yes. We came here 3 months ago from San Francisco. Thomas got work with the logging company, and we thought we could build a good life here. And then the tree fell wrong, and he was gone, and everything fell apart." Faith felt tears building behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the past 2 weeks. "I tried to find work today, but no one would hire me. His mother has poisoned everyone against me." The man was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to her belly and back again. Then he walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside into the cold. Faith felt panic rise in her chest. Was he leaving? Had she said something wrong? But before she could move or call out, he was back, carrying an armload of firewood. He stacked it carefully beside the fireplace, building up a supply that would last through the night and well into the next day. When he was done, he straightened and looked at her again. "My name is Cole Sullivan. I work as a ranch hand for the Thorntons spread about 5 miles north of here, but I live here on my own. I am not often in town, so I do not know your husband's mother or anything about this situation beyond what you have told me. But I know cold and I know hunger, and I know what it looks like when someone has nowhere left to turn." Faith swallowed hard, not sure what to say. Cole continued, his voice still rough but somehow gentler. "You will stay here tonight. The fire will keep you warm and there is food enough. In the morning we will figure out what comes next, but tonight you rest and get your strength back. You and the baby both need that." "I cannot impose on you," Faith said, even though the thought of going back out into the cold made her want to weep. "You do not know me. You have no reason to help me." "I have reason enough," Cole said shortly. He moved to a wooden chest against one wall and pulled out several more blankets, which he brought over and piled on the chair beside her. "I will sleep in the barn tonight. You take the bed." "No," Faith protested, struggling to her feet. "This is your home. I cannot take your bed." "The chair is fine, or I can sleep on the floor by the fire." Cole's expression hardened. "You are 6 months pregnant and half frozen. You will take the bed and that is the end of it." His tone left no room for argument, and Faith was too exhausted to fight him anyway. She nodded slowly and Cole seemed satisfied. He gathered a few things, including a blanket for himself, and moved toward the door. Then he paused and looked back at her. "Stay as long as needed," he said quietly. "I mean that. However long it takes for you to get back on your feet, you have a place here. No one should be thrown out into the cold, especially not a woman carrying a child." Before Faith could respond, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. She stood there for a moment, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, trying to process what had just happened. A complete stranger had taken her in, fed her, given up his bed for her, and told her she could stay as long as she needed. It was more kindness than she had received from anyone since Thomas died, more kindness than she had any right to expect. She made her way to the bed, every muscle in her body aching with exhaustion. The mattress was thin but clean, and there were enough blankets to keep a person warm even in the coldest weather. Faith lay down carefully, one hand resting on her belly, and closed her eyes. The baby moved gently, as though settling down for sleep as well. And for the first time in 2 weeks, Faith felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a confused moment, she thought she was back in San Francisco in the tiny apartment she had shared with Thomas during the first months of their marriage. But then memory came flooding back. The logging accident, Thomas's death, his mother's cruelty, the cold walk into the forest, and the stranger who had saved her life. Faith sat up slowly, her body stiff and sore. Pale morning light filtered through the window, and she could see Cole standing at the stove, cooking breakfast. He must have heard her stirring because he glanced over his shoulder. "There is water in the basin if you want to wash up," he said, gesturing toward a small table in the corner. "Breakfast will be ready in a few minutes." Faith made her way to the basin and splashed cold water on her face, trying to wake up properly and gather her scattered thoughts. When she turned back, Cole was setting 2 plates on the small wooden table, each piled with bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes. There was also fresh bread and butter and 2 steaming cups of coffee. They sat across from each other, and for a few minutes, they ate in silence. Faith tried not to wolf down the food, but it was difficult. She had been so hungry for so long, and everything tasted like heaven. Cole ate steadily, his eyes occasionally flicking to her face and then away, as though he was not sure what to say or do with a pregnant widow in his cabin. Finally, Faith could not stand the silence anymore. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me. For all you know, everything Thomas's mother said about me could be true." Cole set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Could be," he agreed, "but I do not think it is. I have seen enough of the world to recognize the difference between someone running a con and someone who is genuinely in trouble. You are in trouble through no fault of your own, and I was in a position to help. It is as simple as that." "It is not simple," Faith said. "You are risking your reputation by taking me in. People will talk. Let them talk." Cole's voice was flat and unconcerned. "I do not live in town, and I do not care what the gossips say. I work for Mr. Thornton, and he is a fair man who judges people by their actions, not by rumors. As long as I do my job well, which I do, he will not have a problem with me offering shelter to someone who needs it." Faith studied him across the table, trying to understand this man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. He was handsome in a rough way, with strong features and dark eyes that held depths she could not yet read. There was a hardness to him, a wariness that suggested he had seen his share of trouble, but there was also kindness in the way he had cared for her, in the blankets he had piled on her chair and the bed he had given up without a second thought. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, genuinely curious. 3 years. I came west from Missouri looking for work and found it with Mr. Thornton. He let me build this cabin on his land in exchange for me keeping an eye on this section of his property. It suits me fine. I like the quiet. You live alone?" "Always have, more or less." Cole picked up his coffee cup and took a long drink. "I am not much for company, and I like being able to come and go as I please without having to answer to anyone." Faith felt a pang of guilt. "Then I am disrupting your whole life by being here." "You are disrupting nothing," Cole said firmly. "I offered, and I meant it. You need a place to stay until you figure out what comes next. This cabin has room enough for 2 people for a while." He paused, then added, "Though we should probably discuss what your plans are." "Do you have family anywhere? Anyone who might take you in?" Faith shook her head slowly. "My parents died when I was 16. I have a brother in Boston, but we have not spoken in years. He did not approve of Thomas either." She laughed bitterly. "It seems I have a talent for choosing people that no one approves of. Or maybe you just have terrible luck with other people's families," Cole suggested, and there was the faintest hint of humor in his voice. Despite everything, Faith found herself almost smiling. Maybe so. She looked down at her plate, her appetite fading as reality set in. "I need to find work. I have about 3 months before the baby comes, maybe a bit less. If I can earn enough money to pay for a room somewhere and buy supplies for the baby, then maybe I can manage on my own afterward." "What kind of work did you do before?" Cole asked. "I was a seamstress in San Francisco. I am good with a needle and I can do fine embroidery work. But I tried every shop in Willits yesterday, and no one would hire me. Thomas's mother has made sure of that." Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There might be another option," he said slowly. "Mr. Thornton's wife is a good woman, and she is always looking for help around the ranch house. She cannot pay much, but it is honest work, and she would not turn you away because of gossip. I could talk to her if you want." Hope flared in Faith's chest. "Would you? I would be so grateful. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I can earn my keep." "I will ride over there today and talk to her," Cole promised. "But in the meantime, you stay here and rest. You pushed yourself too hard yesterday, And you need to think about that baby." Faith wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could not keep imposing on his hospitality, but the truth was she was still exhausted. The warm cabin and full stomach had relaxed her body to the point where she could barely keep her eyes open. Cole seemed to notice because he stood and began clearing away the breakfast dishes. "Go lie down for a while," he said. "I have work to do at the ranch anyway, so you will have the cabin to yourself for most of the day. There is more food in the pantry if you get hungry, and plenty of firewood. Just keep the fire going and stay warm." Faith nodded and made her way back to the bed. She lay down fully clothed, pulling the blankets up to her chin, and watched as Cole shrugged into his heavy coat and pulled on his work gloves. He paused at the door and looked back at her. "Lock this behind me," he said. "Do not open it for anyone except me. I will knock 3 times when I come back so you know it is me." "You think someone might come looking for me?" Faith asked, fear creeping into her voice. "I do not know," Cole said honestly. "But better safe than sorry. This is rough country and a woman alone needs to be careful." After he left, Faith got up and locked the door as he had instructed. Then she returned to the bed and finally allowed herself to fully relax. The cabin was warm and safe, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt like maybe, just maybe, everything might be all right. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, the sound of the crackling fire a comforting lullaby. When Faith woke again, the sun was high in the sky and the cabin was still blessedly warm. She got up and moved around slowly, exploring her temporary sanctuary with more attention than she had been able to give it the night before. The cabin was small but cleverly designed, with everything a person needed within easy reach. Cole kept his home neat and organized, which told her he was a man of discipline and order. There were books on a small shelf near the bed, mostly practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, but also a worn copy of Shakespeare's plays that surprised her. She found the pantry well stocked with basics like flour, cornmeal, beans, and salt pork. There were also jars of preserved vegetables and fruit, probably purchased from someone in town who did canning. Faith's fingers itched to do something useful, to repay Cole's kindness in some tangible way, so she decided to make bread. The activity would keep her busy and give her something to contribute. She found what she needed and set to work, mixing flour and water and salt, kneading the dough with practiced hands. It felt good to be doing something familiar, something she knew she was good at. As she worked, she thought about Thomas and the life they had planned together. He had been a good man, gentle and hardworking, with dreams of building them a real home someday. Those dreams had died with him under that fallen redwood, but Faith still had their child to think about. She had to believe that there was still a future worth fighting for, still a chance at happiness somewhere down the line. The bread was rising near the fire when she heard the 3 knocks at the door. She opened it to find Cole standing there, his face reddened from the cold wind, his eyes immediately seeking her out to make sure she was all right. "Everything go smoothly?" she asked as she stepped back to let him in. "Better than I hoped," Cole said, pulling off his gloves and coat. "I talked to Mrs. Thornton, and she would like to meet you. She said if you are willing and able, she can use help with sewing and mending. She also needs someone who can teach her daughters basic needlework. She said it would not be full-time work, maybe 3 or 4 days a week, but the pay is fair and you could start as soon as you are ready." Faith felt tears spring to her eyes. She said yes, just like that, Cole confirmed. "Mrs. Thornton is not one to put stock in gossip, and when I told her your situation, she said any woman who could survive what you have been through deserves a chance. She wants to meet you tomorrow if you feel up to it. I can drive you over in the wagon." "Yes," Faith said immediately. Yes, I can do that. Thank you, Cole. Thank you so much. He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. It is nothing, just helping where I can. His gaze fell on the bread rising by the fire, and something that might have been surprise crossed his face. You made bread. I wanted to do something useful, Faith said. I hope you do not mind. I used some of your supplies. Mind? Why would I mind? Cole moved closer to inspect her work. I have not had fresh bread in months. I usually just buy it in town when I remember, but it is always half stale by the time I get it home. Then you are in for a treat, Faith said, feeling pleased. My bread is quite good, even if I say so myself. They spent the rest of the afternoon in companionable near silence. Cole worked on repairing a broken harness while Faith finished the bread and then made a simple stew for dinner. It felt strangely domestic, the two of them working side by side in the small cabin, and Faith found herself relaxing in a way she had not expected. Cole was easy to be around despite his rough exterior. He did not pry or ask uncomfortable questions, and he seemed content to let her be herself without judgment. When dinner was ready, they sat at the table again, and Cole made a point of complimenting her cooking. This is better than anything I have made for myself in years, he said honestly. If you keep cooking like this, I am going to get spoiled. Faith smiled, the first real smile she had managed since Thomas's death. Well, I have to earn my keep somehow. You do not have to earn anything, Cole said, his tone serious. You are here because you need help, not because you owe me something. I know, Faith said softly, but it makes me feel better to contribute. I have felt so useless these past 2 weeks, so helpless. Being able to cook and clean and make bread, it reminds me that I still have value, that I am still capable of taking care of myself and my baby. Cole nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his dark eyes. I can see that. All right then, if it helps you, then cook and clean all you want. But do not overdo it. You still need to rest. That night, Cole insisted on sleeping in the barn again despite Faith's protests. She felt guilty taking his bed for a second night, but she also knew that arguing with him was pointless. He was a stubborn man who had made up his mind, and nothing she could say would change it. The next morning, Cole hitched up his wagon, and they drove together to the Thornton ranch. It was a beautiful spread, with rolling hills covered in grass and oak trees, and a large ranch house that spoke of prosperity and careful management. Mrs. Thornton met them at the door, a handsome woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. You must be Faith, she said warmly, ushering Faith inside. Cole has told me about your situation, and I want you to know that you are welcome here. Come in and sit down. Let us talk about what I need and what you can offer. Faith liked Mrs. Thornton immediately. The older woman was straightforward and fair, laying out exactly what the job would entail and what she could pay. Faith would work 3 days a week, helping with sewing, mending, and teaching the Thornton daughters needlework and embroidery. The pay was not generous, but it was honest work, and Mrs. Thornton made it clear that she did not care one bit about gossip or what Thomas's mother had said. I judge people by their character, not by what others say about them, Mrs. Thornton said firmly. And anyone who would throw a pregnant widow out into the cold is no Christian, no matter what they claim. You are welcome in my home, Faith, and I am glad to have you. Faith had to blink back tears. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. You do not know what this means to me. I think I do, Mrs. Thornton said gently. I was once in a difficult situation myself, and someone helped me when they did not have to. I am just passing that kindness forward. Now, when can you start? Whenever you need me, Faith said. Then how about the day after tomorrow? That will give you time to settle in and get your strength back. Cole, you will bring her. Yes, madam, Cole said. He had been standing quietly by the door, letting the women talk, but now he spoke up. "I will make sure she gets here safely." On the drive back to the cabin, Faith felt lighter than she had in weeks. She had a job, she had a safe place to stay, and she had found people who were willing to help her without judging her. She glanced at Cole, who was handling the reins with easy competence, his eyes on the road ahead. "I do not know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You have given me so much, and I have nothing to offer in return." Cole was quiet for a moment, then said, "You do not owe me thanks. I did what anyone decent should do. But if you want to thank me, then focus on taking care of yourself and that baby. That is all I need." Faith nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She looked out at the landscape rolling past, the tall trees and wild grass, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she allowed herself to think about the future with something other than dread. She had a long way to go, and there would be hard times ahead, but maybe, just maybe, she could build a new life here. And maybe that life would not be so lonely after all. Over the next 2 weeks, Faith fell into a routine that felt almost normal. She worked at the Thornton Ranch 3 days a week, teaching the daughters embroidery and doing mending for the family. The girls were sweet and eager to learn, and Mrs. Thornton treated Faith with kindness and respect. The other 4 days of the week, Faith stayed at Cole's cabin, cooking and cleaning and trying to make herself useful. Cole still insisted on sleeping in the barn, no matter how much Faith protested, and she had stopped arguing with him about it. They had settled into an easy companionship that surprised Faith. Cole was not much of a talker, but he had a dry sense of humor that emerged at unexpected moments, and he was endlessly patient with her questions about ranching and life in California. In turn, Faith told him stories about growing up in Boston and her early days with Thomas in San Francisco. She found herself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit by the fire, Cole working on leather or wood projects while Faith did needlework, the silence between them comfortable and warm. The people of Willits had noticed that Faith was staying with Cole, and the gossip had started up again, but Cole had been right when he said he did not care. He went about his business with the same quiet confidence as always, and after a few weeks, people seemed to lose interest in the scandal. Thomas's mother had tried to stir up trouble, going to Mr. Thornton and demanding that he fire Cole for harboring an immoral woman. But Mr. Thornton had sent her away with a sharp rebuke about Christian charity and minding one's own business. It was late January when Faith realized that something had shifted between her and Cole. She was sitting by the fire one evening, working on a baby blanket she was knitting, when she looked up and found Cole watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something warm and electric that made Faith's breath catch in her throat. Cole looked away quickly, his jaw tightening. "I should check on the horses," he said abruptly, and then he was out the door before Faith could respond. She sat there for a long time, her hands still on the knitting needles, her heart beating faster than it should. She recognized what she had seen in Cole's eyes because she had been feeling it herself for days now, though she had been trying to deny it. She was developing feelings for him, feelings that went beyond gratitude and friendship. And unless she was very much mistaken, he was feeling the same way about her. The realization filled her with confusion and guilt. Thomas had only been dead for 6 weeks. Was it wrong to feel this way about another man so soon? Was she betraying Thomas's memory? But even as she thought it, she knew that Thomas would not want her to be alone and miserable. He had loved her, and he would want her to be happy, to find love again if she could. But there was more to consider than just her feelings. She was pregnant with another man's child, and Cole had given her shelter out of kindness, not because he wanted anything from her. If she told him how she was starting to feel, would he think she was trying to trap him into something? Would it ruin the friendship they had built? Faith decided to say nothing. She would keep her feelings to herself and focus on getting through the next few months. After the baby was born, after she had saved enough money to find a place of her own, then maybe she could think about what might be possible between them. But for now, she would not risk losing the only friend she had in this harsh land. February brought warmer weather and the first signs of spring. The hills around Willits turned green, and wildflowers began to bloom in sheltered spots. Faith's belly had grown large, and she moved with increasing difficulty, but she continued working at the Thornton Ranch and keeping Cole's cabin in order. Mrs. Thornton had started giving her baby clothes and supplies, hand-me-downs from when her own children were small, and Faith had gratefully accepted every item. Cole had become increasingly protective as Faith's pregnancy progressed. He insisted on driving her to and from the ranch, even though it was out of his way, and he watched her like a hawk when she was at the cabin, making sure she did not lift anything heavy or overexert herself. Faith found his concern both touching and frustrating. She was not made of glass, but she also appreciated that he cared enough to worry. One evening in late February, they were sitting by the fire after supper when Cole suddenly spoke. "I have been thinking," he said, his voice careful, "about what happens after the baby comes." Faith looked up from her sewing, her heart suddenly beating faster. "What do you mean? You cannot stay in this cabin forever," Cole said, though he did not look happy about saying it. "It is too small, and people will talk even more than they already do. You need a proper home, a place where you can raise your child without people making assumptions." "I know," Faith said quietly. "I have been saving my wages from Mrs. Thornton. I am hoping to have enough to rent a small room in town by summer." Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Then he said, "There is another option, one that would solve a lot of problems, though it might create some new ones." "What option?" Faith asked, though part of her already knew what he was going to say. Cole finally looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "We could get married. It would give you and the baby a permanent home, and it would stop the gossip. The child would have my name and my protection, and no one would be able to say anything against you ever again." Faith's hands had gone still on her needlework. "Cole, you do not have to do that. You have already done so much for me. I cannot ask you to tie yourself to me and another man's child. You are not asking. I am offering." Cole's voice was steady, but Faith could hear the undercurrent of something deeper, something he was not saying. "I know it would be a marriage of convenience, not a love match. I am not asking for anything from you except that you let me help you and the baby. We get along well enough and we already live together anyway. It just makes sense." "A marriage of convenience," Faith repeated, her chest aching with something that felt like disappointment. Of course that was what he meant. He was being practical, solving a problem, not declaring any deeper feelings. She should be grateful, should jump at the offer, but instead she felt a strange sadness settling over her. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "It is a big decision, and I do not want to trap you into something you do not really want." "You would not be trapping me," Cole said firmly. "I would not have offered if I did not mean it. But yes, think about it. Take all the time you need. The offer stands either way." That night, Faith lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Cole was offering her everything she needed: a home, protection, a father for her child. She would be a fool to turn him down. And yet, the thought of marrying him knowing he only saw it as a practical arrangement, knowing that he did not love her, was almost unbearable. Because the truth was, she had fallen in love with Cole Sullivan. She loved his quiet strength, his dry humor, his kindness, the way he made her feel safe and valued. She loved the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, the way he always made sure she had enough to eat, the way he had given up his bed for her without a second thought. But he did not love her. He cared about her, certainly, and he felt responsible for her, but that was not the same thing. If she married him, she would be condemning herself to a life of loving a man who only saw her as an obligation, a problem he had solved. And yet, what choice did she really have? She could not raise a child alone in Willits with no money and no prospects. She could try to go back east to her brother in Boston, but that would mean months of difficult travel while heavily pregnant, and there was no guarantee her brother would even take her in. Cole's offer was the best option she had, possibly the only option she had. The next morning, Faith made her decision. She found Cole in the barn, grooming one of the horses, and she walked right up to him before she could lose her nerve. "I will marry you," she said, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions inside her. "If the offer is still open, I accept." Cole stopped what he was doing and turned to face her fully. "You are sure? You have thought it through?" "I have thought about nothing else all night," Faith said. "You are right that it makes sense, and it is the best option for me and the baby. If you are truly willing, then yes, I will marry you." Something flashed across Cole's face, something that looked almost like relief or maybe happiness, but it was gone before Faith could be sure. "All right then," he said. "We will do it properly. I will arrange for us to see the preacher this week, and we will have a legal ceremony. I want everything done right so there is no question about the child's legitimacy." "Thank you, Cole," Faith said softly. "I know this is not what you planned for your life, but I promise I will do my best to be a good wife to you." "I know you will," Cole said, and there was a warmth in his voice that made Faith's heart skip a beat. "And I will do my best to be a good husband to you and a good father to the baby." They were married the following week in a simple ceremony at the small church in Willits. Mrs. Thornton and her husband served as witnesses, and the preacher asked no uncomfortable questions. Faith wore her best dress, which she had let out as much as possible to accommodate her swollen belly, and Cole wore a clean shirt and vest. There were no flowers, no celebration, just a brief exchange of vows and the signing of the marriage certificate. When the preacher said Cole could kiss his bride, there was a moment of awkwardness. Cole leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to Faith's cheek, and she felt a wave of disappointment that she tried to hide. She reminded herself that this was a practical arrangement, not a romantic marriage, and she should not expect more than what Cole had offered. They drove back to the cabin in silence, and Faith felt a strange melancholy settling over her. She was married again, but it did not feel the way it had felt with Thomas. With Thomas, there had been joy and excitement and hope. With Cole, there was only practicality and careful distance. When they reached the cabin, Cole helped her down from the wagon and then stood there awkwardly, as though unsure what to do next. "I will still sleep in the barn," he said finally. "Unless you would prefer I sleep on the floor in here. Either way, I will not impose on you. This is a marriage in name only, for legal protection. I am not expecting anything else from you." Faith nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She went inside and closed the door, then sat down on the bed and let the tears come. She cried for Thomas, for the life they should have had together. She cried for herself and the strange situation she found herself in. And she cried for Cole, who had tied himself to her out of kindness and was now stuck with a wife who loved him but could never tell him so. Over the next few weeks, not much changed in their daily routine except that Cole now wore a wedding ring and Faith was known as Mrs. Sullivan instead of Mrs. Anderson. They were still careful around each other, still maintaining a polite distance that felt increasingly unnatural. Faith longed to reach out to him to tell him how she felt, but fear kept her silent. She could not bear the thought of him rejecting her or, worse, feeling obligated to pretend feelings he did not have. March came with rain and wind, and Faith's time was drawing near. She had stopped working at the Thornton Ranch because the ride had become too difficult, and she spent her days at the cabin preparing for the baby's arrival. Cole had built a cradle out of smooth pine, working on it in the evenings with painstaking care, and Faith had sewn tiny clothes and blankets until her fingers ached. One night in mid-March, Faith woke to a sharp pain in her lower back. She lay still for a moment, trying to assess whether this was just another false alarm or the real thing. Then another pain came, stronger this time, wrapping around her belly like a vice, and she knew. The baby was coming. "Cole," she called out, her voice shaky. She had to call twice more before she heard movement from the barn, and then Cole was bursting through the cabin door, his hair disheveled and his eyes wide with alarm. "What is wrong?" he demanded, moving to her side immediately. "The baby is coming," Faith said through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. "It is time." Cole went pale, but he did not panic. "I will ride for Mrs. Thornton. She said she would help when the time came. Can you manage until I get back?" "I think so," Faith said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. "Just hurry." Cole was out the door in seconds, and Faith heard him mounting one of the horses and riding off into the night at a gallop. She got up and began moving around the cabin, remembering what the midwife in San Francisco had told her about staying active in early labor. The pains were coming regularly now, about 10 minutes apart, and they were getting stronger with each one. It felt like an eternity before Cole returned with Mrs. Thornton, but it was probably only about an hour. Mrs. Thornton took charge immediately, sending Cole to boil water and gather clean linens while she helped Faith into a nightgown and settled her on the bed. The older woman's calm competence was reassuring, and Faith felt some of her fear ease. "You are doing fine," Mrs. Thornton said, checking Faith with experienced hands. "This baby is in a hurry to meet you, but you have a few hours yet. Just breathe through the pains and trust your body. It knows what to do." The next several hours were a blur of pain and effort. Cole stayed in the cabin despite Mrs. Thornton's suggestion that he might prefer to wait outside. He sat in a chair near the fire, his face pale and tense, his hands clenched into fists. Every time Faith cried out, he flinched as though he had been struck, but he did not leave. Finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, Faith felt an overwhelming urge to push. Mrs. Thornton guided her through it, coaching her on when to bear down and when to rest. Faith had never experienced anything so intense or so exhausting in her life. Just when she thought she could not take any more, Mrs. Thornton said, "One more push, Faith. Just one more and you will have your baby." Faith gathered every ounce of strength she had left and pushed with all her might. She felt a sudden release, and then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the angry wail of a newborn baby. "It is a boy," Mrs. Thornton announced, her voice full of satisfaction. "A fine, healthy boy." Faith collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Thornton quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Faith's arms. Faith looked down at her son, at his red face and tiny fists and shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama, and I love you so much." She looked up and found Cole standing beside the bed, staring down at the baby with an expression of awe on his face. Without thinking, Faith said, "Would you like to hold him?" Cole looked uncertain. "Are you sure? I have never held a baby before." "Neither have I," Faith said with a tired smile. We can both learn together." Mrs. Thornton showed Cole how to support the baby's head and neck, and then Faith placed her son in Cole's arms. The big, rough cowboy held the tiny infant with exquisite care, his large hands gentle and sure. The baby stopped fussing and blinked up at Cole with unfocused eyes, and something passed between them, some wordless connection that made Faith's throat tighten with emotion. "He is perfect," Cole said softly, his voice rough with feeling. "What will you name him?" Faith had thought about this for months, had gone through dozens of names in her mind, but suddenly she knew exactly what she wanted to call her son. "Samuel Thomas Sullivan," she said. "Samuel for my father, Thomas for his birth father, and Sullivan because that is the name he will carry and the man who will raise him." Cole looked up at her, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears. "Are you sure? You do not have to give him my name." "I know he is not mine by blood. He is yours by choice," Faith said firmly. "And that means more than blood ever could. You have given us everything, Cole. The least I can do is give him the name of the man who will be his father." Cole nodded, unable to speak, and turned his attention back to the baby in his arms. Mrs. Thornton bustled around, cleaning up and making sure Faith was comfortable. She stayed for a few more hours, making sure both mother and baby were doing well, and then she prepared to leave. "You did beautifully, Faith," she said warmly. "And Cole, you have a fine son there. Congratulations to you both." After Mrs. Thornton left, Cole brought the baby back to Faith and sat on the edge of the bed. They sat together in the quiet cabin, watching their son sleep, and for the first time since their awkward wedding, the distance between them seemed to fade. "Thank you," Faith said quietly, "for everything. For saving my life, for marrying me, for being here through all of this. I know this is not what you wanted, but I am grateful beyond words." Cole reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. "Maybe it was not what I planned," he said slowly, "but I cannot imagine my life any other way now. You and Samuel, you both belong here. This is your home, for as long as you want it." Faith felt hope stirring in her chest, fragile and tentative but real. Maybe this marriage of convenience could become something more. Maybe, given time, Cole could come to feel for her what she felt for him. She would not push, would not demand more than he was willing to give, but she would hope. And for now, that was enough. The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming, but Faith had never been happier. Samuel was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in predictable stretches, and Faith found herself falling more in love with him every day. Cole was an attentive and caring father, despite his initial uncertainty. He would walk the floor with Samuel when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until the infant settled. He changed diapers without complaint and could swaddle Samuel as expertly as any nursemaid. Watching Cole with their son, because that was how Faith thought of them now, their son, made her love him even more. She saw a side of Cole she had not known existed, a tenderness and patience that he kept hidden from the rest of the world. He would sit by the fire in the evening with Samuel on his chest, the baby's tiny body rising and falling with Cole's steady breathing, and the sight of them together made Faith's heart ache with longing. She wanted to tell Cole how she felt, wanted to bridge the careful distance they still maintained, but she did not know how. They were still sleeping separately, Cole in the barn and Faith in the cabin with Samuel. They still spoke to each other with careful politeness, never quite crossing the line into deeper intimacy. It was as though they were both waiting for something, but neither knew what. April brought warm weather and an explosion of wildflowers across the hills. Samuel was 6 weeks old, and Faith had regained most of her strength. She had started working on a garden behind the cabin, planting vegetables and herbs that would help stretch their food supplies through the summer. Cole had helped her prepare the soil and build a fence to keep out deer and rabbits, and they had worked side by side in the sunshine, not talking much but comfortable in each other's presence. One evening, Faith was sitting on the porch with Samuel in her arms, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Cole came out of the barn and joined her, sitting down on the steps beside her. For a while they sat in silence, both watching the baby sleep. "Faith," Cole said finally, his voice uncertain in a way she had never heard before. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Faith said, her heart starting to beat faster. Cole was quiet for a long moment, as though choosing his words carefully. "Are you happy here, with this life we have?" "I know it is not what you expected, and I know I am not much of a husband. If you want more, if you want something different, I will do my best to give it to you." Faith turned to look at him fully, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "Cole, I am happier than I have any right to be. You have given me and Samuel a home, safety, a future. What more could I possibly want?" "I do not know," Cole said, still not meeting her eyes. "A real marriage, maybe. Someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved." Faith's breath caught in her throat. "And what if I told you that I already have that?" she said quietly. "What if I told you that I have fallen in love with you, Cole Sullivan, and that I want this marriage to be real in every way?" Cole's head snapped up, his dark eyes wide with shock. "What did you say?" "I love you," Faith repeated, her voice stronger now. "I have been in love with you for months, but I was afraid to tell you. I thought you only married me out of duty, out of kindness, and I did not want to burden you with feelings you did not share. But I cannot keep pretending anymore. I love you and I want to be your wife in truth, not just on paper." Cole stared at her for a long moment, and then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his whole appearance. "You love me," he said, as though he could not quite believe it. "Really?" "Really," Faith confirmed, her own smile starting to emerge. "Why is that so hard to believe?" "Because I am just a cowboy with nothing much to offer," Cole said. "And you are beautiful and brave and stronger than anyone I have ever met. I have been in love with you since about the second week you were here, but I thought you could never feel the same way about me. You married me because you needed protection, not because you wanted me." "I wanted you," Faith said, reaching out to take his hand. "I want you. I have wanted you for so long, but I was afraid to hope that you might feel the same way." Cole lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I have loved you for months, Faith. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you never give up no matter how hard things get. I love watching you with Samuel, love seeing you make a home out of this little cabin. I have wanted to tell you so many times, but I was afraid of pushing you, of making you feel obligated when you were just starting to heal from losing Thomas." "I will always love Thomas," Faith said honestly. "He gave me so much, and he gave me Samuel. But he is gone, and I am still here, and I need to live my life. And I want to live it with you, Cole, if you will have me." "If I will have you," Cole laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. "Faith Sullivan, I will have you every day for the rest of my life and count myself the luckiest man alive." He leaned in and kissed her, a real kiss this time, not the chaste peck he had given her at their wedding. Faith kissed him back with all the love and longing she had been holding inside for months, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless and smiling. Samuel chose that moment to wake up and let out a loud wail of protest. They both laughed, and Faith adjusted the baby in her arms, trying to soothe him. Cole reached out and touched Samuel's cheek with one gentle finger. "I love him too, you know," Cole said softly. "He is my son in every way that matters, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure he knows how much he is wanted and loved." "I know," Faith said, tears of happiness sliding down her cheeks. "You are already an amazing father, and you are going to be an amazing husband." "I will do my best," Cole promised. He stood up and held out his hand. "Come on. Let us put Samuel to bed, and then maybe we can start this marriage over the right way." Faith took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They went inside together, a real family at last, and as Cole closed the door behind them, Faith felt her heart overflow with gratitude and love. She had lost so much, had been cast out into the cold with nothing and no one, but she had found something infinitely precious in return. She had found home and love, and a future brighter than anything she had dared to imagine. That night, for the first time since they married, Cole did not sleep in the barn. After they put Samuel down in his cradle, Cole and Faith stood awkwardly in the small cabin, both suddenly uncertain now that the moment had arrived. "I can still sleep on the floor if you prefer," Cole offered, though his eyes told a different story. "No," Faith said firmly. "We are husband and wife, and I want you beside me. I have wanted that for a long time." They lay down together in the bed that Faith had been sleeping in alone for months, and at first they just held each other, getting used to the closeness and warmth. Cole wrapped his arms around her, and Faith rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I would have this," Cole said quietly into the darkness. "I never thought anyone would love me or want to build a life with me. I always figured I would end up alone, just me and my horses and the open range." "You are not alone anymore," Faith said, tilting her head up to look at him. "You have me and you have Samuel, and you will never be alone again. I promise you that." Cole kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips, and Faith felt a warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. They made love slowly and gently, taking their time to learn each other's bodies and preferences, and afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, both feeling more content than they had ever been. Over the next few months, their life together settled into a new rhythm. They were a true family now, a husband and wife who loved each other deeply, and a son who thrived under their combined care. Cole continued working for Mr. Thornton, and Faith continued doing sewing work for Mrs. Thornton, though now she brought the work home so she could stay with Samuel. Money was tight, but they had enough, and they were happy. The people of Willits gradually accepted their marriage, and even Thomas's mother eventually stopped spreading rumors, perhaps realizing that no one was listening anymore. Faith saw her once in town, and the older woman had looked away quickly, shame or regret flickering across her face, but Faith felt no bitterness toward her anymore. She had Cole and Samuel, and that was all that mattered. In August, when Samuel was 5 months old and starting to laugh and grab at everything within reach, Cole came home from work with a thoughtful expression on his face. They ate dinner together, the three of them, with Samuel sitting in a high chair Cole had built, gumming a piece of bread and making happy noises. After Samuel was asleep, Cole said, "I talked to Mr. Thornton today. He is getting older and thinking about the future of the ranch. He said he wants to promote me to foreman and give me a share of the profits. It would mean more responsibility but also more money. Enough that we could start saving for our own place someday, a real ranch of our own." Faith's eyes widened. "Cole, that is wonderful. You deserve it. You have worked so hard for him." "I would not have this opportunity if it were not for you," Cole said seriously. "You have given me a reason to work hard, a reason to build something for the future. Before you came into my life, I was just drifting, doing enough to get by but never really striving for anything more. Now I want to give you and Samuel everything you deserve. I want to build us a home that is truly ours, where we can raise Samuel and maybe other children too, if we are lucky." "Other children," Faith said, her heart skipping a beat. You want more children? Of course I do, Cole said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I want a house full of them if you are willing. I want sons and daughters, laughter and chaos, a family that is loud and messy and full of love. But only if that is what you want too. I know how hard it was for you when Samuel was born, and I will not push you if you are not ready. I want that too, Faith said, squeezing his hand. I want to give Samuel brothers and sisters, and I want to build a life with you that is everything we both dreamed of. Yes, Cole. Yes to all of it. They spent the rest of the evening making plans for the future, talking about the kind of ranch they wanted to build, and what they would name it, and how many children they hoped to have. It was a conversation full of hope and dreams, and Faith felt herself falling even more deeply in love with this man who had saved her life and given her a future. A year passed, then two. Cole became Mr. Thornton's foreman, and true to his word, the older man gave him a generous share of the ranch's profits. Cole and Faith saved every penny they could, living frugally but happily in the small cabin. Samuel grew into a bright, active toddler who adored his father and followed Cole everywhere he went. When Samuel turned 2, Faith discovered she was pregnant again, and the news filled them both with joy. Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Rose Sullivan, was born in the spring of 1886. She had Faith's delicate features and Cole's dark eyes, and from the moment she arrived, Samuel was completely smitten with his baby sister. He would sit by her cradle for hours, singing to her and showing her his toys, and Faith and Cole would watch their children together and marvel at how blessed they were. By 1887, Cole had saved enough money to make an offer on a piece of land adjacent to the Thornton Ranch. It was 200 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, and a stand of oak trees that would provide shade for livestock. Mr. Thornton supported the purchase, and even loaned Cole some additional money to help him get started. Cole, Faith, and their 2 children moved into a new house that Cole built with his own hands. A solid structure with 3 bedrooms, a big kitchen, and a porch that looked out over the rolling hills. Faith cried when she saw the house for the first time, overwhelmed by how far they had come from that cold December night, when she had stood at the edge of town with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Cole had found her in her darkest moment and offered her not just shelter but love, family, and a future. And she had given him the same in return, filling his lonely life with warmth and laughter and purpose. They named their ranch the Sullivan Homestead, and over the next few years they built it into a thriving operation. Cole raised cattle and horses, while Faith kept a large garden and sold her needlework in town. Samuel grew tall and strong, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly, and Catherine became the darling of the entire county with her sweet nature and infectious laugh. In 1889, Faith gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Jacob Cole Sullivan. And 2 years after that, in 1891, they welcomed their 4th and final child, a daughter named Rose Margaret Sullivan. Their house was indeed full of noise and chaos and love, exactly as Cole had dreamed. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Samuel grew into a responsible young man who dreamed of expanding the ranch. Catherine developed a talent for horses that rivaled her father's. Jacob was the family scholar, always reading and asking questions about everything. And Rose was the baby who never quite stopped being the center of attention, charming everyone she met with her bright personality. Cole and Faith grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their share of challenges, as all families do. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle that died of disease and crops that failed. There were arguments and disagreements, moments of frustration and exhaustion. But through it all, they stood together, facing every challenge as a team, and their love never wavered. In the summer of 1895, they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. All their friends and neighbors came, including Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, who were now elderly but still sharp and engaged. The children had prepared a special meal, and after everyone had eaten, Cole stood up and proposed a toast. 10 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, I found a woman standing in the cold with nowhere to go. I invited her into my cabin and told her to stay as long as needed. I had no idea then that she would stay forever, or that she would transform my entire life. Faith Sullivan, you made me a husband, a father, and a better man than I ever thought I could be. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Here is to another 10 years, and another 10 after that, and as many more as God grants us. Faith stood up beside him, tears streaming down her face. And here is to the man who saved my life, not just that one cold night, but every day since. Cole, you gave me everything when I had nothing. You loved me when I felt unlovable. You gave my son a father and a name. You built us this beautiful home and this beautiful life. I am so grateful for every moment we have shared, and I look forward to every moment still to come. I love you, Cole Sullivan, today and always. They kissed to loud applause and cheering from their guests, and then the fiddles started up and there was dancing late into the night. Faith danced with Cole, and then with each of her children, and then with Cole again. She looked around at the ranch they had built, at the home filled with family and friends, at her children growing up strong and happy, and she felt nothing but gratitude. She thought about that December night in 1883, when she had been cast out into the cold, pregnant and alone and terrified. She thought about the cabin in the clearing and the cowboy who had built her a fire and told her to stay as long as needed. She thought about how one act of kindness had changed the course of her entire life, had led to love and family, and a happiness she had never imagined possible. Years continued to pass in a gentle rhythm of seasons and cycles. Samuel married a sweet girl from town in 1899 and brought her to live at the Sullivan homestead, where he took over more and more of the ranch operations as Cole gradually slowed down. Catherine surprised everyone by becoming a horse trainer of some renown, traveling around California to work with difficult horses that no one else could handle. Jacob went to college in San Francisco, the first member of either Cole or Faith's family to receive higher education, and came back with a law degree and plans to open a practice in Willits. Rose, true to her nature, fell in love young and married at 19 to a kind young rancher from a neighboring property. Cole and Faith became grandparents, then grandparents many times over. Their house was always full of children, grandchildren running through the rooms where their own children had played, and the cycle of life continued in the most beautiful way possible. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with the years, but their love as strong as ever. On a warm evening in the late spring of 1910, Cole and Faith sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of orange and pink. They were both in their 50s now, their working days mostly behind them, content to let their children run the ranch while they enjoyed a quieter pace of life. "You ever think about that night?" Faith asked softly, her hand resting in Cole's. "The night we met." "Every day," Cole admitted. "I think about what might have happened if I had not looked out my cabin door at that exact moment, if I had not seen you walking across the clearing. It terrifies me to think about it, about how easily we might have missed each other." But we did not miss each other, Faith said, squeezing his hand. We found each other exactly when we both needed it most. You needed someone to love, and I needed someone to save me. It was meant to be, Cole. I truly believe that. So do I, Cole said. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, the same gesture he had made so many times over the years. You are still the best thing that ever happened to me, Faith Sullivan. After all these years, after everything we have been through, I love you more than ever. And I love you, Faith said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Thank you for building me that fire, Cole. Thank you for telling me to stay. Thank you for every day of this beautiful life we have built together. They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Around them, their ranch thrived. Their children and grandchildren lived happy lives, and their love story continued, a testament to the power of kindness, compassion, and the courage to love even when it seemed impossible. Faith thought about the young widow she had been, standing in the cold with nothing but fear and desperation. She thought about the cowboy who had offered her shelter and ended up offering her the world. And she thought about all the years between then and now, all the moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, that had woven together to create this rich tapestry of a life well lived. She had been cast into the cold, but a cowboy had built her a fire and told her to stay as long as needed. She had stayed forever, and it had been the best decision she had ever made. Their love story had not started with grand romance or sweeping declarations. It had started with simple kindness, with basic human decency, with one person seeing another in need and choosing to help. But that small beginning had grown into something magnificent, something that had lasted decades and would continue to ripple out through their descendants for generations to come. As darkness settled over the ranch and the stars brightened overhead, Cole and Faith went inside together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held. They had already faced so much together, had overcome obstacles that might have destroyed lesser people, and they had emerged stronger and more deeply connected than ever. Their story was not one of dramatic rescues or impossible odds overcome, though it had elements of both. It was a story of two people choosing each other every day, working together to build something meaningful, loving each other through good times and bad. It was a story of family and legacy, of the home they had created not just in wood and stone, but in the hearts of everyone they touched. And on those occasional cold winter nights, when the wind howled around the ranch house and reminded them of that December evening so long ago, Cole would pull Faith close, and they would remember together. They would remember the moment their lives changed forever, the moment kindness became love, the moment two lonely people found in each other everything they had ever needed. The Sullivan homestead continued to thrive for many years, passing from Samuel and his wife to their children and eventually to their grandchildren. The ranch became known throughout Northern California as a place of excellence, where cattle and horses were raised with care and skill. But more than that, it became known as a place where family mattered, where love was valued above all else, where the story of Cole and Faith Sullivan was told and retold as a reminder of what really mattered in life. As Cole and Faith entered their final years together, they remained devoted to each other. When Faith fell ill in the winter of 1915, Cole never left her side, sitting by her bed and holding her hand through the long nights. And when she recovered, Faith did the same for Cole when his own health began to fail. They had promised each other a lifetime, and they kept that promise faithfully until the very end. They died within 6 months of each other, both in their 60s, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved them. Cole went first, passing peacefully in his sleep in the autumn of 1918. Faith followed him in the spring of 1919, and everyone who knew them said she had simply decided it was time to join her beloved husband wherever he had gone. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the Sullivan homestead, beneath two oak trees that had grown from saplings into mighty sentinels over the decades of their marriage. Their grave markers were simple but elegant, bearing their names, the years of their lives, and a single shared inscription that their children chose together. She was cast into the cold. He built her a fire. Together they built a love that lasted forever. The story of Cole and Faith Sullivan became a legend in Willits and the surrounding area. Parents told it to their children as an example of how one act of kindness can change everything, how love can grow in the most unexpected places, how two people who seem to have nothing can build everything together. Samuel Sullivan, their eldest son who was not biologically Cole's but who always considered himself fully and completely a Sullivan, lived to be 90 years old. He often told the story of his parents to his own children and grandchildren, making sure that their legacy of love and kindness was never forgotten. "Your grandfather saved your grandmother's life," he would tell them, "but she saved his life too in a different way. He was a lonely man who had resigned himself to a solitary existence, and she brought him warmth and joy and purpose. They saved each other, really. And from that mutual salvation came all of us, every single one of you sitting here listening to this story. You exist because one cold December night, a cowboy saw a woman in need and chose to help her. You exist because they chose to love each other even when love seemed impossible. Remember that. Remember that kindness matters, that compassion matters, that choosing to help someone in need can change the entire course of history." And the children would listen, wide-eyed and attentive, and they would carry that lesson with them throughout their lives. The Sullivan family continued to grow and prosper, spreading throughout California and eventually across the country. But no matter how far they traveled or how much time passed, they always remembered their roots. They remembered the ranch in Willits, the cabin in the clearing, and the two people whose love story had started it all. The small cabin where Cole and Faith's relationship began was preserved by the family, restored and maintained as a reminder of where everything started. It became a place where Sullivan descendants would visit when they needed to remember what really mattered, a shrine not to wealth or power, but to simple human kindness and enduring love. In the small graveyard on the hill, beneath the oak trees that provided shade and shelter just as Cole had once provided shelter to Faith, their graves remained a testament to a love that had defied expectations and lasted a lifetime. Visitors would often leave wildflowers there, small tokens of appreciation for a couple they had never met, but whose story had touched their hearts. The Sullivan homestead continued for generations, eventually becoming a historical landmark that people came from all over to visit. Tour guides would tell the story of Cole and Faith, of how their love had built not just a ranch, but a legacy that continued to inspire people more than a century after it began. And on cold winter nights, when the wind blew down from the mountains and snow occasionally dusted the hills around Willits, people would think of Faith Anderson standing in the cold, pregnant and alone and desperate. They would think of Cole Sullivan opening his cabin door and building her a fire. They would think of the words he spoke that changed everything. Stay as long as needed. She had stayed forever. And in staying, she had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story for the ages, a reminder that in our darkest moments, when we feel most alone and most afraid, kindness can appear like a light in the darkness. Sometimes that kindness comes from the most unexpected sources, from strangers who become friends and then family, from cowboys who build fires that warm not just bodies but souls. Faith had been cast into the cold, but she had found warmth. She had been rejected and cast out, but she had found acceptance and belonging. She had lost everything, but she had gained more than she could have ever imagined. And all of it started with one simple act of human decency, one person seeing another in need and choosing to help. That was the true legacy of Cole and Faith Sullivan. Not the ranch they built, or the children they raised, or the decades they spent together. Their true legacy was the reminder that love can bloom anywhere, that kindness matters, that choosing to help someone in need is never a waste of time or energy. Their legacy was hope, was the promise that no matter how dark things seem, no matter how cold the night or how alone we feel, there is always the possibility of warmth, of connection, of love. And that legacy lived on, generation after generation, in the hearts and lives of everyone who heard their story and chose to believe that love, real love, the kind that lasts forever, is still possible if we are brave enough to reach out to each other in our times of need, if we are willing to build fires for those standing in the cold, if we have the courage to say those simple words that can change everything. Stay as long as needed. Forever turned out to be exactly long enough.